Okay, good morning, Dad. Today is Monday, November 25th, and I'm going to start you off with a few headlines.
All right.
This is from over the weekend. BBC, no red lines in Ukraine support, French foreign minister tells BBC. And then Le Monde, discussions over sending French and British troops to Ukraine reignited. And then from the Times, France won't stop Ukraine firing long-range missiles at Russia. And then also over the weekend, I believe 5 attack missiles were fired into Kursk, maybe some more. But what do you make of all this? Where are we headed?
Okay. Well, I guess, first I want to comment on the last bit of information you provided about the 5 attackums. I don't think that's been confirmed. I saw that report too. But but it was, I think on a Telegram channel, but I never saw it confirmed in any, other news source. And then I think just about an hour ago, I was reading Simplicius the Thinker's most recent post, and he said that was garbage. So, maybe that never happened. I think it probably never did happen. But everything else he said, yeah, okay, those are the headlines, and they're very alarming. I know last Friday you asked me if I was kind of scared, and I said, well, no. But actually yesterday, thinking about it, and actually after hearing, that news and some other news, I did start to become rather alarmed. It is a very worrying situation. It's just the utter recklessness of Western leaders really could get us into World War III. I mean, it's just, because I stopped and think, another thing I think I said on Friday is just said that, okay, what Putin is trying to do is to slap a drunk, just wake him up. He's trying to avoid an all-out fight, but he just needs him to wake up and start, speaking rationally. And I stopped and thought, well, clearly that hasn't worked. Especially the French reaction indicates that it hasn't worked. But then say, well, what if he goes ahead, Putin does, and makes good on his promise to respond to another ATACMS or Storm Shadow or Scalp strike in Russian territory with an equivalent strike on NATO territory. I guess initially I was thinking, well, that'll wake him up, surely. But I don't think it will. I mean, it's just that, partly because within the West, the narrative with virtually no exceptions. Actually, I only saw the first exception, I think, yesterday, and it came from the French paper Le Monde, which you just mentioned. They actually had an article that explained that these Scalp missiles and Storm Shadows and ATACMS need to be programmed, by NATO technicians, and that's the problem. I mean, that's the only Western news story that I am aware of that makes that point, that acknowledges this crucial point, this bit of information that explains, the alarm within Russia and the very strong statements that Putin has made, and would explain, to Western publics, why NATO is responding. But that's, nobody's going to hear that. That's one small voice and just a cacophony, a sea of voices that do not acknowledge that crucial fact. And so if Russia actually does retaliate, everybody will be utterly shocked. Say, why? This came out of the blue. It was sort of like the SMO. Of course, Russia had been warning, explaining, what the problem was. This is an existential threat, but it was completely ignored with the West. So when Russia launched the SMO in February of 2022, there was no context, and it was just an unwarranted, unjustified, so-called full-scale invasion. And this will be the same thing. So it'll just ratchet things up farther, and we may really, we are on a knife's edge now. If for example, France starts firing scalps into Russia, I think, will see that they have no choice but to respond in kind. And it could be an attack on NATO territory, or it could be through the Houthis or a proxy. But either, however they do it, it's probably it's not going to sober up the other side. That was my hope. But upon reflection, that's just not what's happening. They're just going to, go shoot up the escalation ladder and And who knows what they're going to do, but it's not going to be good.
So you think that we will immediately just bang the war drums even louder once Russia retaliates? There's no slapping us into sobriety anymore?
That's what I'm afraid of. I mean, just look at everything that's happened so far. I mean, I guess the only thing we can say is that the only it seems to me like sane voices, occasionally sane voices, have been coming from the Pentagon. Like, again, I think the Pentagon's very unhappy with this, with what's happening. I think it's clear that they were fighting this tooth and nail all along, and they were able to hold off the warmongers, the neocons, for a while. But in the end, they have to take their orders from the civilian leadership. And so
this is insanity.
Yeah, it is.
The crazy thing for me is just that how it seems like most people aren't really aware of the danger. Most people, I mean, imagine when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened way back in the day. That was all the news 24/7. But here, just the mainstream media,
people were driving to Canada.
Right, but here it's the opposite. There's no talk about the risk of nuclear war or how terrible something like this could cascade into World War III and how catastrophic it could be for the entire planet, with potentially Armageddon and ending the planet. It just seems the mainstream media just seems so cavalier on just, we got to support Ukraine no matter what. There are no red lines. We got to teach those Russians a lesson.
Right.
How do you think this will play out, though? I mean, if it seems like the Europeans and the American people, they don't want to escalate. So if they do go up the escalation ladder more and it starts getting more real, well, what's the off ramp? What's our only chance of hope here?
I don't know. I mean, in the end, I don't think the people are going to be able to stop it, and the people, unfortunately, are victims of the propaganda. So just as when the SMO was launched in February 2022, the people were completely uninformed. They didn't know that there had been a civil war that had been ongoing for 8 years already in the Donbass. They didn't know that the Ukrainians were firing artillery shells into Donetsk city and other Donbass cities on a daily basis throughout that time, and it killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. They didn't know any of that. So it just seemed like, what is this? This just came out of the blue. It was unprovoked. So, the leaders could get away with that assertion that this was an unprovoked attack on a freedom-loving country. And so the initial reaction within Western publics was to rally to the Ukrainian side. And there was a lot of, I think, genuine fervor and in support of Ukraine and anger at Russia. Now, over time, that's died down, and the support really isn't there anymore. But I think we'd see something similar, because this will be portrayed in the same way. This was a completely unprovoked attack. It just came out of the blue. There was nothing, this is the Russians have gone crazy. We got to do something about this. We got to teach them a lesson. And Western publics, because they're so ignorant, they will be convinced of that, and they will at least initially support it. And then maybe that initial support is all that the governments need.
Why are we not hearing more from the Trump administration about this? We heard a little bit right when it happened, but in my mind, that may be the one way that maybe we can calm things down and cool things off, is if the president-elect is making a lot of noise about this and telling the Russians and telling Putin, like, hey, this is not the path we want to take. We want to negotiate. We want to sit down. We want to resolve this amicably. We're going to end this escalation. If we were hearing that, then I would feel a little bit safer, because I think people are starting to get scared now. If you listen to Scott Ritter, he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to that.
Well, he tends to. No, Scott Ritter is great. I love the guy. But he tends to engage in hyperbole. There really is a threat of nuclear war, so he's right to be ringing the alarm bells now. But the way he makes everything sound is like we're all going to die in 3 weeks or something, which is, there's no certainty about that. Or if this happens, we will all die. It's never quite like that. So he engages, but he's right. But there is a risk, and he is really right to be shouting from the rooftops. More power to him.
Right. I mean, just the fact that there's a possibility. I mean, and I think you probably also saw that Joe Rogan also went off a little bit recently, which is great, because that Joe Rogan is the mainstream now.
Right. He can get out. Yeah, he gets through to average Joes out there.
Right. You see the Ukrainian shills were losing their mind on Twitter, which was great to see. It's like, okay, good. Now maybe we can start to talk about it a bit more openly. That, hey, what are we doing here? What is happening? Because this is getting scary. But then what can calm things down and would make me relax a little bit, and I think everybody else, is if we heard the Trump administration make some firm statements, firm commitments.
Yeah.
But the fact that we haven't is worrying. It's like, what if he gets in there and then he's just like, you know what, this is, we're going ahead with this,
Yeah, I've never had much faith in Trump. Again, he occasionally says great things. He occasionally talks to great people. He made one wonderful appointment with Tulsi Gabbard, but all his appointments before and since, unfortunately, like the last several that he's done, have been just horrible. I mean, they're just... they're, if anything, worse than what we had under Biden. They're all demented hawks. And so, if he's surrounding himself with these people, he's putting these people in making these nominations, suggests to me that he's just not serious. I think he has that notion, like just everything being equal. Yeah, he'd like to end the war, but that's the way Trump is. He doesn't know how to follow through. He doesn't have the I think really the intellectual or moral discipline to follow through on these things. Because you're absolutely right. If he came out and made a firm statement, that could make all the difference in the world. Because first of all, it would be a message to the Russian government. Okay, look, they're doing this, but understand that when I get there, it's over. Okay, so please keep that in mind, in when you make your decisions on how to respond to these provocations, because that's what they are. And if you call them provocations, the Western publics would hear that too, and that would change their understanding of the situation. And Western governments as well. They say, oh, this is the new, the new leadership. We better not cross him, and he's made it clear that he's where he stands. So I think they would back off. I think the British, and I think the Americans would find even though they're being pushed to go down this road by Biden, I think they would find ways of delaying or something, because they would understand that this is not good for them, and that they essentially have had the rug pulled out from under their feet by Trump. He could do it, but he's not doing it. You're right. And I think that's, unfortunately, it was all too predictable.
Well, why do you think he's not saying it? Well,
it's just Trump. I mean, this is what I remember from Trump in the first. He occasionally says great things, but he has some good opinions, from time to time. He expresses them, then he expresses the opposite opinions. He just doesn't really have those firm commitments. He's not a principled believer in these causes, and so therefore he just doesn't have that. Maybe he'll say something off the cuff that'll be great, but he won't follow up on it. That's just Trump. That's who he is.
Do you think there could be anything to do with the people he surrounded himself with these ultra-Zionists? Do the Zionists want escalation?
Because, no, I don't think. No, actually, I don't think they do. I guess in general, they're usually the same kind of people. The ultra-Zionists, most of them, not all of them. There are some exceptions. Are also hawks on everything else. They just, it's a question actually of priorities. In general, the American political class is hawkish in general, and they all regard Russia, China, and Iran as enemies. It's just it's a question of which enemy they put at the top of their list. But yeah, I think these Zionists, they don't care as much about it as certain Russia hawks, but in general they're hawkish on Russia too.
Yeah, I mean, just my thinking was maybe that if things are getting desperate for Israel, they see that they've really painted themselves in the corner, boxed in. Same thing with Zelensky. Sometimes the only way out is just to start chucking grenades. Let's just go total chaos, World War III, and draw on the U.S. and hopefully come out on top. Because we are seeing this alliance between Russia and Iran, right? And in everything, I was watching BBC last night, and there was just a piece, and they were talking about the situation in Lebanon, and the guest they had on was saying, look, really, we have to go for Iran. No matter what, even if we reach a ceasefire, it's temporary. We have to take out Iran. Iran is it. So it's clear like that. That's the focus. But Russia will never let Iran fall. So I was just thinking that maybe in Israel's mind, they say, well, we have to take them all out. We have to take out Russia and Iran. Because if the goal is Iran, how are you going to take out Iran if Russia is actively, providing defense? There's a mutual defense. There's some type of defense treaty in there. It's clear that Russia is going to support Iran. So I was just thinking, like, could Trump just be thinking, okay, he's got all these Zionists surrounding him, and said, let's keep the Russia thing going because it might be good for Israel in the long run, and they're thinking, or is that just kind of crazy?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they're making that calculation. I can't say it's impossible, but first of all, it would be utterly insane. I know they're all kind of unhinged.
Far from the course, though, right?
Right, yeah. So there probably are some, there may be some people that actually think that way. But let's just say I haven't heard anybody voice that opinion. And so I don't think that that's really, let's say, a factor that's really influencing what we're observing here.
Okay, well, let's just fingers crossed that Trump can, grow up here and really tell the world, like, hey, this is not the path we want to be headed.
Yeah, that would be, again, that would be the best way to solve this, and he could solve it. I just don't think he will. Right.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit just more about the Rushnik missile, because I feel like that incident really changed things. It really did kind of change the game. I think for militaries around the world, how do you think, the Pentagon, Western military defense contractors, whatever, how are they viewing this? Like, to me, it makes everything we've seen so far look primitive. Everything that the U.S. has done. And I was hoping that, like you said, that this is a slap in the face, sober up. Right. But it hasn't. So, well, to be honest, I mean, what does this say about what are our defense industry saying or feeling about this? Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't know if the defense industries have said anything. I'm sure that there are people in the Pentagon who are shocked by this and understand what it means, and maybe the slap in the face worked for them. I think that's probably true. But again, they cannot. They are not the decision makers, and the political class seems to be unaffected. These people are living in la la land, and I think will continue to. I was hoping that they would start waking up at some point, and maybe there still will be some point at which they wake up, but I'm just not seeing it.
How much further ahead do you feel like the Russian and Chinese militaries are than the United States?
Well, I've heard that the Americans have something like this in development, but I think it's supposed to come out in 2027. Now, often, they'll give a date like that, and then they'll extend it and extend it again. Maybe it won't be 2030. So they're clearly at least a couple of years behind. And so, I mean, this is a real leap forward in technology. There's nothing like this. I think that the Chinese may have something similar, a prototype that they tested several months or maybe a year ago. This is the first one, but the Russians have actually used it in combat. It's not just that it's hypersonic. It's not just that it has the multiple maneuverable reentry vehicles, but it's also a glide vehicle. Apparently, this hasn't been confirmed, but this is what Theodore Postel, the rocket scientist from MIT, believes. He says he can't. He doesn't have enough data to make that statement conclusively, but he very strongly suspects, because based on the trajectory of this ICBM, I'm not an ICBM, but of a ballistic missile, it should have fallen well short of its target. So what he says must have happened was that this went out of the atmosphere, and then instead of just re-entering the atmosphere, the way that an ordinary ballistic missile would do, it's kind of skipped along the atmosphere for many more hundreds of miles and then descended. So it gives it a much greater range. And so just all around, this is revolutionary. And I think what Putin said is just absolutely true. There's just no defense against this. There's nothing even on the horizon that can defend against this. And the West doesn't have anything comparable. And maybe in 2 years they will. Maybe not. We'll see.
If they were headed towards an all-out clash between NATO and Russia and potentially China and Iran as well, to me it just seems like there's just no way that the West can win in any way. Like, why? Is there something that the West has that I'm not talking about? Because everything I've seen has just been pretty pathetic coming from the West in terms of all these special systems that we sent to Ukraine,
right?
As well as Israel, which is part of the West as well, using our military equipment.
Well, it's very effective against civilians in Gaza and Lebanon.
Right, but it all seems quite primitive. Everything that I'm seeing, it just seems like the same thing they've been doing for the past 30, 40 years, flying planes over and dropping bombs on people.
Right.
Like, that's...
right. Again, they're living in the 1990s. That was awesome back then. And they just completely, devastated Saddam Hussein's army.
Right.
They made short work of it.
Right.
And this is 30 years later.
Right, and if we talk about the missile exchanges between Iran and Israel, it's just clear that Iran also just has the upper hand in terms of ballistic missile technology, long-range missiles.
Right.
Israel doesn't have it. And even Iran, in my opinion, looks primitive compared to what Russia has. But Israel looks primitive compared to what Iran has. So it's like, what are we doing here? And it looks like... It's just, I can't wrap my head around it. I was just told all my whole life, America's number one.
Yeah.
No debate. Most powerful military. We can kick anybody's ass. No questions asked. I more or less had that belief until this war happened in Ukraine. And then I was like, I don't even think, I think we would struggle against Zimbabwe at this point. It's like, maybe not that bad. But you know what I mean. Yeah. It's just,
sure.
How did we get to this point? How did this happen? Like, how did we spend $1 trillion a year on our military-industrial complex?
Yeah. Well, it's something, actually, I think Brian Berletic describes it very well. He says that we have a for-profit military industry, and the Russians have a for-purpose, that's the term that he uses. And I think that's actually a good way to look at it. Okay, we have this... we have these for-profit corporations that churn out our missiles. Now, that doesn't mean they can't do a great job. And if you had a really clean system with, let's say, with good oversight and real competition between companies, it could actually be a very effective way to produce weapons. But the thing is, over time, these for-profit corporations have corrupted the whole process. We have what's called a revolving door. There's generals, retire and they become lobbyists for these corporations, and everybody knows that it's going to happen. So it's just like so even before they become lobbyists, they've already kind of cozied up to the corporations and give them, really lucrative contracts, and that's what it's all about. It's become a very cozy relationship between between the Pentagon and in general, the security state on the one hand, and these corporations on the other. And for them, it is all about profit on both sides. A lot of people, have done very well by the system. Many people have, and they have no interest in changing it. It's just that, in the end, it doesn't really meet the purpose. But these people don't care about that. It's about profit. And that's what's happened. So we have these big kind of flashy weapons with lots of bells and whistles on them that are over-engineered and actually extremely expensive. And that's actually the point of it. There's no incentive to actually keep costs down. The incentive is to increase the price tag, and then everybody gets a bigger share, right? So that's the way things are. That's the system in this country. So we have these big flashy systems, that used to do really well at the at the military expos in these various third world countries, and oil exporting countries like Saudi Arabia would buy them up. They were happy to have these big shiny toys. But this war in Ukraine has exposed the weakness of the system. First of all, it turns out we don't have very many. We're not able to produce them in sufficient quantities for a real war. And then second, that these are not nearly as effective as they were claimed to be. The Russians have found ways to neutralize all of them. And the Saudis and other people can see it. So, just as an example, the Saudis for the first time ever bought an air defense system from Russia just about a month ago. And I think that's just the beginning of a major trend, a shift away from American weapon systems.
So if the Saudis can see it and we can see it, why can't Western politicians see it? Why are they gearing up for a conflict with Russia?
They still live, because they believe that we are, in American exceptionalism. It is a religion to them. It's, that America is number one, and that America, has kind of a divine right to rule the world, and that any country that opposes America just simply is out of line and needs to be put back in line, needs to be punished. And that's the way Americans have looked at it ever since really the fall of the Soviet Union. That was when the Soviet Union fell, then that's when you got these theories that this is the end of history, that basically we won and we've won forever. And we're now at the top of the heap, and that's the way things are. And they, clearly it isn't, but all these people, the political class has this imperial mindset that, and they can't seem to get out of it. I think in some ways, it's analogous to what you saw in China. I mean, there's some big differences, but there's also some real similarities. There was a time when China was, it was never world power because we didn't have world powers back then, 1,000 years ago. But 1,000 years ago, the Tang Dynasty was mighty, and so much mightier than any country within that China. Every other kingdom that China had contact with was so small and puny in comparison, and China was so prosperous and so rich. And this went on dynasty after dynasty, century after century. That it just became ingrained that that's who we are. China is the middle kingdom. China is civilization. Barbarism is out there. They're cute little people, and we'll pat them on the head if we choose not to invade them. Actually, China was not very aggressive. There were wars on the borders, and China did expand, but rather slowly. But then, with the first contact with the Europeans, let's say starting more or less, it was even earlier, but starting in the 18th century, the Chinese at that point, the ones who were paying attention saw, these aren't just cute little foreigners. They have technologies we don't have. They have powers, a military power that we don't have. But the Chinese didn't wake up. There was just this complacency, this sense that, this is who we are, and it's just pointless to think anything else. And that went on to the very end until the collapse of the empire, when China was already being carved up by these foreign powers. I think it was just very, very difficult for them to adjust to the new reality. And I think it's I don't want to take this too far, but I think it's somewhat similar. It's just like, that's our reality. America is number one. And, don't talk to me about this other stuff. It's just like, that's the basic truth of the situation. So what are you talking to me about, attackums or whatever? I don't want to hear it. I think pretty much that's what Biden said, remember, when he was asked if it would be a mistake for America to be fighting two wars at once. And the answer is, hey, we're the United States of America, the most powerful military force on the planet. That's end of story. What are you talking about? And I think that's how they all think. I mean, there's just this real kind of smugness, complacency, and hubris. It's an imperial hubris. And maybe that's how a lot of empires end up falling, that over time they're the great empire, and then it goes to their heads, and they start to think, well, we have this natural right. It wasn't an accident of history. It wasn't because actually maybe our our forefathers were really remarkable. It's just like, we Americans, we Chinese, we just have the right to rule. We were somehow divinely appointed to do this. But I think the current situation is actually much scarier than what happened in China, because that Chinese power that fell, that empire, was very conservative and cautious and inward looking. And now we have a combination of an empire that is falling, but that is also in the grips of some sort of ideological zeal. It has an ideology that it wants to export and impose on the rest of the world. So you have an empire that is in decline. It is not admitting it, and at the same time is being is on a crusade to actually spread its ideology and its power throughout the world. And I think that's an extremely dangerous combination. That's what we see.
Right. I mean, it's way scarier than the China story, because we have nuclear weapons now.
Yeah, right. And that's in the mix. Exactly.
Yeah. So you really think that these people, they just won't wake up? They will just refuse? They're in the grips of...
Well, so far, I just don't see the evidence of it. I just don't. That's the unfortunate truth. Sometimes I'm hopeful. And again, there may be some point at which they wake up. Either that happens, or the other thing to hope for is, like, especially in Europe, that some of these dissident parties are able to actually take power. Whether it's in Austria, Germany, France, those are all places where it could happen, and change policy, change course, but we may not have time to do that. I mean, really, right. It's a very scary situation. I'll have to admit it, just on reflection. It's just that, like, this rhetoric coming from Macron is really, the guy's not an idiot, That's one thing you can say about him. He's actually a smart guy. Some of these other people, you wonder, like Baerbock or whatever in Germany. I think she is a true idiot. Old 360 Baerbock, but Macron is not. He's a smart guy, but he's an imperialist. He can't let go of empire. For him, it's the Western Empire and the French Empire within the Western Empire, and that's something he can't let go of.
Right. Yeah, no, we really need more leaders within NATO standing up, to say no to this. I mean, good on Maloney. I think Italy is voiced their
even
discontent.
Olaf Scholz, for all his... Yeah. I mean, I find the guy just disgusting, a human worm, but he has held firm on that. And he seems to understand, that is something that is a red line that he just cannot cross. He has that understanding. But the guy who's likely to replace him does not. He's actually really gung-ho about, shooting Taurus missiles into Russia. And again, these Taurus missiles can easily hit Moscow. They have a much longer range.
Right. Yeah, Mertz. And that's supposed to be, what, February 20th or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, right.
Right. So it's, we're running out of time. If Trump doesn't make a firm statement and says that he wants to end this, then it's going to start getting scary. And then if Olaf Scholz goes out and we got Mertz in, then we're looking at some really serious escalation, I think, at this point.
Yeah,
That this is the time to start looking at flights to South Africa. It could... Is that crazy? Is it time to fly to South Africa?
It's not crazy, no. But I would actually look to flights to Uruguay.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
You're more of a Uruguay guy.
Yeah.
Okay, but we hopefully maybe a little good news. I heard that there was some elections in Romania, and there was a surprise person that rose to the top is somebody that is against this escalatory rhetoric and wants to negotiate with Russia to end this nonsense.
Right.
So hopefully, if we see more of that happening.
Yeah. Well, again, throughout Europe we see that, but first of all, that is encouraging. But it was just the first round, and I think he got 22.5% of the vote. So he's going to have to get a lot more than that to win. And then that the establishment is just going to play all kind of dirty tricks, like in Moldova. In fact, the opposition, which wanted better relations with Russia, probably should have won and would have won that in a fair election. But they just played all kind of dirty tricks. For example, they deprived many maybe tens of thousands of voters in Russia of the right to vote. They opened up only 2 polling stations that were in the embassy in Moscow, and there are a lot of Moldovans in Russia, and the reason they did that is that they knew that overwhelmingly they would support the Russian-friendly candidate. And that's just one example. And they did something similar in Transnistria, where they also knew there was very strong Russian support. So they played these dirty tricks, and they managed to get the pro-EU candidate elected and the EU referendum supported. But I think in a fair election that would not have happened, and we'll see something similar will probably happen in Romania. I mean, again, it is encouraging to see. Again, you do see some, like there is some real awareness. Some people really have woken up in Europe, I think more so than in this country, maybe because the situation is much more dire in Europe. But you have an establishment that will stop at nothing to retain their power. So it's going to be a difficult fight no matter what.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I hope that more and more people in Europe are waking up. I heard that Germany even admitted, and I don't know if it was in an article, I forget where I saw it, but that Russia is able to produce in 3 months all the munitions that Europe would take a whole year to make. So that Russia is outproducing Europe in munitions by 4 times, the whole of Europe. And I think that should just be a good wake-up call to Europeans, like, hey, we are in trouble here. Let's don't keep on escalating. We can't do this.
Right.
So there are some things starting to leak out, and I hope more and more people are realizing how scary the situation is and will vote. I mean, we did that here in the U.S. I think that's one of the big reasons that Trump won was people were wanting to end these wars. But I just need. I want to hear from him.
Yeah, I think looking at the actual statistics, I mean, it's something that's very important to people like us. But most people don't vote on foreign policy. In fact, the great majority. I think the polls showed that 4% of the electorate put foreign policy first. 4%.
Okay. Well,
and most of those voted for Trump. But it could, that's not something to sneeze at, because that was like 1% for Trump that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And in a close election, it could have made the difference. It's something. But it's people who say that, well, Trump, his base is solidly against these wars, and so they're going to hold him to it. I'm afraid that they're being very, very kind of naive. Unfortunately, much of the base is just hyper-partisan pro-Trump. Whatever Trump says, if he says he's going to bomb Moscow tomorrow, the great majority of them, there'll be that 4% that said, oh my God, what's happening? But the rest are going to say, yay, yeah, bomb Moscow.
Oh, great. Well, do you think that all this attention now on the Ukraine-Russia conflict and this precarious situation we are in will cool things down with the hawkish position towards Iran and China, or our establishment just so crazy? Our Western-based headline, no, we'll take them all on.
Yeah,
Trump comes in office, starts bombing Tehran, says Taiwan, we got your back. I mean, he's like, this is insane. Right. I mean,
right. I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm a little bit more optimistic on China. Even though Trump is known as kind of being he was the guy that launched a trade war against China. Who knows? But I guess there are some real China. He certainly has appointed some real China hawks. But I just don't see that happening. Unfortunately, he's appointed people that are truly unhinged about Iran, and a lot of them. And Trump has shown those same tendencies. And so I think we are going to see. We've seen escalation and unconditional support for Israel already under Biden. But if anything, it's going to get worse under Trump. I think my only hope of, in the Ukraine theater is that Russia will be very, very careful, cautious in its response to these provocations. And I hope there are not too many of them. I hope that their missiles continue to shoot down the ATACMS and Storm Shadows and so forth. And they don't feel tremendous pressure to make a really strong response. And in the meantime, they launch an offensive that is just that just brings about the total collapse of the Ukrainian defenses. And then I think if they can do that, this is the thing, which is not impossible. I mean, all these things could happen. And then Trump takes office. At that point, he won't have the pressure. He won't be under pressure to be tough with the, or let's put it the other way. Like I said earlier, it'd just be much easier for him to walk away from Ukraine because it would be so obvious that those many billions and billions of dollars that have been thrown in did not succeed, and they won't be able to blame him for the failure in Ukraine. But what Biden and them are doing is, well, at least partly what they're attempting to do, is just to keep Ukraine going for at least until January 20th, so that it becomes Trump's problem. I think a lot of them know that it will collapse. They just wanted to collapse while Trump is in office, and then he'll take the blame. Do
you think these actions that they're taking is going to actually help Ukraine at all?
No,
or will it expedite their demise?
Well, probably, if anything. And obviously, as we've said many times, it doesn't help them at all. So it's hard to believe that these people are so stupid, but I think a lot of them are. Again, I think, they're just ideologues, and they just don't, they get bored with nuts and bolts of issues. They don't want to hear about, missile ranges and hit accuracies and whatever. But, that's reality. They're not interested in reality. They're just interested in ideology and politics and demonstrating will and that kind of thing. It's not going to make a bit of difference. But a lot of those political leaders seem to think it will, but it will not.
Do you think if Trump and the United States escalate situation with Iran, that also escalates things with Russia at the same time?
Potentially, but not necessarily. I think Russia will try to stay out of things in the Middle East. It doesn't want to have, it has its hands full there in Ukraine and does not want to be directly involved in the Middle East. But it will certainly support Iran as it is supporting Iran. It'll provide technologies and weapons and advice and whatever. And also with satellite data too.
Right, because I think within Russia, people know that who we're fighting is NATO, and primarily the United States. That's who we're fighting, America. Right. So if America starts going to war with Iran, then it's like, well, we got to support. Iran's our ally. They do have some type of defense treaty, right? That has been signed, right? Some type of.
I don't know if it's been signed, but nobody's worried about it. I think they're just dotting a few I's, crossing a few T's, or waiting for some time that's appropriate. But I think it's basically a done deal. I haven't heard anything to contradict that. Yeah.
Right. So Russia will support Iran, and they also have an incentive to, because if Iran is waging a war against America, well, Russia is currently waging a war against America via Ukraine. That's what that's what Ukraine is. It's a proxy war against Russia. Yeah. That's what we have going on.
Yeah.
And then the same
thing.
And
it's becoming more than a proxy war with these new missile strikes. That's what the escalation is, of course.
Right, it's becoming a direct war. So that's what I'm afraid of, is that we have all these Iran hawks, and then the focus goes on Iran. If we do go on a war with Iran, I just see that melding into this conflict with Russia. So that's why I was kind of worried about Trump and his support with Iran, and maybe the Zionists in his camp.
Yeah,
so
right, yeah, it's exactly. I think. They're mainly focused on Iran, but they'll notice that Russia is backing Iran, and that could lead to further anger and escalation towards Russia.
Yeah, this thing is spiraling out of control. We don't have sane people.
Right. Yeah, that's the main problem.
It's terrifying. We have also the conflict in the Middle East is terrifying as it is, but it's again overshadowed by what's happening here in
what's happened
Ukraine.
recently
You know,
in Ukraine. Yeah, I was feeling kind of good. You just say, hey, the Pentagon won this battle about the restrictions on the missiles, and they were sticking to their guns, and so he was thinking, well, okay, yeah, maybe this is where it stops, and then, but of course, that's not how things ended, So yeah, now it's become a much more worrying situation than it was.
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to try to pivot to the Middle East a little bit because there is some news coming out of there. I don't know if you saw this, but Israel has sanctioned the oldest newspaper in Israel, Haaretz.
Yeah.
Probably due to this headline, I'll read it to you. Netanyahu brought the ICC ruling on himself, and now he's whining about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So what type of impact is this having on Israeli society? Is this causing a...
Yeah. Okay, now they're not outright banning the paper. They what they're doing is they decided to pass a law to prevent let's say government agencies or publicly funded institutions from in any way supporting the newspaper, by, for example, placing advertisements in the newspaper. So they're depriving the newspaper Haaretz of revenue stream that way. Which is, is clearly a blow, and I think is probably unprecedented in Israeli society. Whatever you say about Israel, it's actually been a very kind of open democracy among Jewish Israelis, very freewheeling and a lot of vigorous debate about all kinds of things. And Haaretz is one of the best examples of that. I look at it regularly, at least read the headlines, and I don't think they go as far as they really need to. In criticizing the actions in Gaza and Lebanon, but they do some real muckraking. They do shine a light on some of the dark side of Israel in a way that other newspapers in Israel don't do. So yeah, it's a sign too that maybe that Israel is changing internally. It's not just its aggressive policies. It's the wars that it's waging against its neighbors, but internally it's becoming a different country as well. It's becoming increasingly authoritarian. Where once it was not. It really, still is very free, but it looks like it's starting to go down the road towards some sort of military authoritarianism.
Okay, do you think that's going to cause more unrest within Israel? Is that
yes, yeah. Potentially.
Yeah, I'm just hoping.
There is already quite a bit of unrest. There's a lot of anger directed at Netanyahu. And, this will increase that anger, I'm sure.
Right. I've asked you that question before, like, how can Israel be stopped, in this genocide in Gaza and the bombing of Lebanon and just this escalation with Iran? And you said that you don't see any way that this is going to end. Do you still believe that, or is there some hope that internally within Israel?
Well, Netanyahu could be pushed out of power. He does have some real vulnerabilities. He's under investigation, and he's very wily. He's always dodged the bullet in the past, but he may not be able to continue to do so in the future. So there is a chance that Netanyahu could actually be convicted, and arrested. But unfortunately, I don't see the wars ending, because anybody who's going to replace him is going to actually continue the same aggressive policies. That's the sad truth. It's just that you just look at the political parties that rule Israel. You look at the public sentiment; it's all in favor of these wars, and that's the sad truth. So I don't see internal changes bringing about a stop to the wars. I just don't see it. And so I think the only way that Israel, of course, the best thing would be for the U.S. to say we're stopping support and they could end, but that's not going to happen either. We're, for the reasons that we well know. So I only can see it ending with a military defeat of Israel, and that's going to be a very scary thing, because they have the nuclear option, and they might really use it.
They're both scary, Dan. Which
one's
scarier
right
now? What's going on? What's going on?
Well, again, I I think it's much more likely, if you wanted me to put money on which place a nuclear weapon is going to be used first, I would put it on my money on the Middle East. Again, it's just that I don't think that Israel would hesitate for a moment to use it if they're really losing, in danger of losing. I think they would use it. And then, in Ukraine, well, Russia would only resort to nuclear weapons if it's very survival were at stake, and that's just not going to happen. So we would have to be on the Western side. And yeah, there clearly are some deranged people there, but I don't think they're quite at the level of Israel. We don't, again, as I said, and I'll say it again because I think it's really true, that Israel is in the grips of a genocidal apocalyptic cult. I don't think you could say that about Europe. You got a lot of stupid people, you got a lot of reckless people, you got a lot of deluded people, but I don't think that they actually want to fire a nuclear weapon.
Well, let me read you a couple of headlines I saw regarding the Middle East, Israel, and Hezbollah. So this is from CNN. This is all stuff very recent, just past 24 hours. Ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah is very close, regional source says, as Lebanon death toll climbs. Axios says U.S. believes Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire deal reached. Senior official. Is that just nonsense? The same that we've always heard with Gaza.
Yeah, well, we often got stories just like that about the negotiations between Hamas and Israel, and they always prove to be false. It's just a game that the U.S. plays. I think they're trying to create pressure, or I don't know really what they're trying to do, but there's no reason to believe that that's happening. Again, the ceasefire deal that Israel wants is for essentially for Lebanon to surrender its sovereignty to Israel. Israel would have, what they're demanding is that, okay, we'll stop our ground invasion, maybe we'll even pull back, but we have the right to fly over Lebanon at any time and drop bombs wherever we want to. That's a real country is not going to agree to that. There's just no way. And in Lebanon, I know there's some questions about how real a country is, but they're not going to agree to that.
Okay, so usually when we see these, this is just Israel saying that we'll have a ceasefire, but with contingencies in there that they know the other side won't accept. So then they can go back and say, look, Hamas, Hezbollah, they don't want to sign the ceasefire deal.
Yeah, we were ready to have a ceasefire, and then Hezbollah torpedoed it. That's probably what it's all about. And again, Axios is very close to the CIA. It's basically it's a news agency that was designed to receive leaks from the CIA. Occasionally, CIA leaks may be true, but often they're fabrications. Usually are, for political ends.
Okay, is there any other updates from the Middle East? I have been following it closely the past couple of days, just ever since the news about the missile strikes into Russia.
I think it's been more of the same. Again, that Hezbollah it continues to fight very bravely and effectively in southern Lebanon, and the Israelis are clearly having a great deal of trouble there. And actually, remarkably, they've been suffered quite a few casualties in Gaza. After all this time, it seems in the last couple of weeks, they've suffered more casualties. A number of tanks have been taken out, and a number of their soldiers have been killed. So Hamas, despite all its disadvantages, is still putting up a very brave fight. They're not making it easy for the Israelis.
Is there any word on the Iranians?
I haven't heard a thing, so we're still waiting for that, right?
Yeah, it just seems like, for the people in Gaza, it's been over a year. Yeah. It's just nobody's coming to help them, and it's just wondering how much longer can they hold out before they all start to die. It's getting dire. So you're just wondering at what point is somebody going to stand up and do something. What's so crazy about this conflict, with Gaza is that it's basically being live streamed. You know, this is in the modern age. So there's just no excuse for people, for countries around the world to say like, oh, we didn't know. We know what's going on. And it's not pretty. It's not good.
Yeah. Right.
And so many people are standing just refusing to look at it or just don't want to think about it. But this has been happening for over a year now. And it has to end. It's got to end.
Yeah.
And it's just so shameful that it's continuing because of the United States. And the same thing in Ukraine. You know, we're endangering the whole world, and we're just clearly in the wrong in both of these conflicts. So wrong. Yeah. And I'm just ashamed to be an American. You know, maybe I do need to move to Uruguay, and then I don't know what it's like there, but it's upsetting.
Yeah.
Okay, Dad. Is there anything else you'd want to talk about, or should we end it there?
I think this is a good place to end.
Okay, let's end it there. Okay, thanks. Have a good day.
You too.